Okay, let's zoom out for a second here because there's because these stories may look disconnected. All right, so we have, let me scroll down here. NVIDIA financing data centers, Meta putting AI on your laptop, Anthropic watermarking Claude, Bumble changing its founding rule, and Spotify labeling AI personas. Okay, now AI is moving from being, well, all of these stories are actually telling one very clear combined story, which is AI is moving from being a technology story into an infrastructure story, an ownership story, and ultimately an authenticity story. And honestly, I think that's the part people need to pay attention to. Now, let's start with NVIDIA's $500 billion infrastructure push, excuse me. So I want to say NVIDIA is no longer just selling the shovels. It is increasingly helping finance the gold rush, right? So NVIDIA has partnered with major financial institutions, including BlackRock, Blackstone, Goldman Sachs, and others on financing platforms that could mobilize more than $500 billion to help fund AI infrastructure and chip purchases. And this is where my sort of alarm bells go off because the number is enormous, but the structure is even more interesting. We are entering a world where the company supplying the compute is also becoming part of the machinery financing that compute. And that tells you something important. It's that the bottleneck is no longer simply can we build a better AI model? The bottleneck is can we finance enough electricity chips, data centers, and networking capacity to actually run these models at scale? Now, that is a completely different economic game. And I think we should be intellectually honest about the other side of this. When the chip master is helping enable the financing of the infrastructure needed to buy its chips, we have to ask very precise questions about risk, leverage, and circularity. I'm not saying AI is a bubble. I'm saying when $500 or $500 billion enters the conversation, I want to understand exactly who carries the risk. And that is a distinction that matters. Now, moving over to Meta's Muse Glimmer, excuse me, we sort of get the exact opposite direction. Now, Meta released the Muse Glimmer, which is a 30 billion parameter open weight model designed for agentic tasks and capable of running on a single graphics card rather than requiring a giant cloud deployment. And this is fascinating because the AI industry has spent years training us to think bigger data center, bigger cluster, bigger model, more compute. Meta is saying, what if some genuinely capable AI just runs on your machine? Now, this matters because local AI changes the economics. It can mean lower latency, more privacy, less dependence on cloud infrastructure, more control for developers, and potentially a much larger population of people who can experiment with and customize sophisticated AI systems. Now, this is where open-weight AI becomes strategically important because the future of AI cannot be only a handful of companies sitting behind enormous server farms deciding who gets access to intelligence. There is another possible future. Intelligence becomes distributed. And I think that's one of the most consequential debates happening in technology right now. Now, moving over to Anthropic, this one gets a little uncomfortable because Anthropic has introduced an imperceptible watermark into Claude generated or Claude processed text, allowing the company to identify whether Claude likely influenced the text. And the system is being rolled out globally, with Anthropic saying it is connected to regulatory requirements and transparency around AI generated content. And I think this is bigger than the watermark itself. We are moving toward a world where AI generated content doesn't just get created, it gets provenance. This is a massive shift. Think about what happened with digital photography, then video, then social media. For years, the internet essentially operated on Here is some content. Good luck figuring out where it came from. AI is forcing us to confront the problem at scale. Who created this? Was AI involved? Which system? And how much? Now, eventually, those questions are going to matter in hiring, education, journalism, advertising, entertainment, and law. I do want to make one distinction here. Watermarking and C2PA content credentials are related but not identical technologies. C2PA is a broader provenance standard for establishing the origin and history of digital content, but the direction is unmistakable. AI is creating an authenticity problem, and the industry is beginning to build an authenticity layer. Now, let's leave AI for a second and talk about Bumble. So, Bumble has officially moved away from its long-standing women message first, women message first model. Following its August 2026 update, either person can initiate the conversation, fundamentally changing one of the defining characteristics of the platform. And honestly, this is bigger than a dating app feature update. Bumble built its identity around one very simple proposition, which is women control the first move. That wasn't a minor UX decision, that was the brand. So when you remove that, you're not just changing functionality, you're renegotiating the reason the company exists in the consumer's mind. And that's the part I find fascinating. Companies spend years building differentiation, and then sometimes market pressure forces them to dismantle the very thing that made them different. Maybe that's the right move, but there's a question every brand should ask before making a change like this. If we remove the thing that made us distinct, what exactly is left? Because convenience isn't differentiation, and copying the category isn't strategy. Now, talking about Spotify, they're preparing to introduce AI persona labels beginning in mid-September for artist profiles that are AI generated or appear to represent AI generated identities. Spotify says those profiles will generally be excluded from editorial and algorithmic recommendations unless a listener already follows them. This one I actually love because it's another example of the same underlying trend we just saw with Anthropic, which is transparency is becoming a product feature. Spotify already introduced Verified by Spotify to help listeners identify authentic artist profiles. Now we're getting the inverse signal. This may not be a human artist's identity. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this because here's the reality. AI makes it incredibly cheap to manufacture content. So we're going to see a lot more of it. But when the supply of content becomes effectively infinite, authenticity becomes very scarce. And scarcity creates value. So suddenly, human made isn't just an ethical statement, it can become a competitive advantage. Now, the bigger takeaway here is, let's connect all of the dots. NVIDIA is helping build the financial infrastructure for AI. Meta is pushing AI toward local distributed infrastructure. Anthropic is building provenance into AI output. Bumble is learning that changing a product's defining behavior can fundamentally change its brand identity, and Spotify is starting to make authenticity visible at the interface level. Different companies, different industries, but one enormous underlying transition. We're moving from the era of AI capability into the era of AI consequences. The question is no longer simply what can AI do? The better questions are who owns it, who finances it, where does it run, who gets to control it, can we tell what's real, and perhaps most importantly, What becomes more valuable when machines can produce almost anything? My answer is trust. Human judgment, authenticity, taste, accountability, and the ability to know the difference between something that is merely impressive and something that is actually worth our attention. And frankly, that is the AI conversation I want to be having. Not just look at how powerful this model is, but what kind of world are we building around that power, and are we being rigorous enough about it?